I lied to you. Word order in a language is a lie. Well, not exactly. I recently made a video where I discussed the different word orders that exist to categorize languages in the world. Go check it out if you haven't seen it yet. This might help you understand today's video. Basically, we can categorize all the languages in the world, which is about 7,000, in 6 categories based on the order of the words. But there's actually a catch. Some languages don't have a defined word order. What's worse, some languages look like they have multiple word orders at the same time. So, how is this possible? Let's begin by looking into languages that have more than one word order, but are not 3 word order languages. Why is it the case, and how? First, I need to highlight an important point when talking about word order. There are moments where it may seem that the language allows multiple word orders, and often, it technically does. But it does not mean that this language is described as having these word orders. Let me explain with the example of English. English is a subject-verb-object language, SVO. But there are instances where this word order is changed. For example, think of a question where we have a verb-subject inversion. A simple example would be did you, where we have a verb-subject structure. This does not mean that English has an OVS or VSO word order. SVO is the default and what is used for almost every statement. On top of questions, you can think of playing with words like you could see in poetry, where poets might change word orders to sound more, well, poetic. Here's another example based on a comment from one of you on the last video about this topic. I eat apples. Pears? I don't. We have an OSV structure here, and it's grammatically correct. But it does not mean that English is an OSV language, but rather that, in some contexts, it is possible to have an instance of this. There are other factors that come into play in specific contexts like this one, such as topicalization, sometimes prosody, or simply playing with words, just to give a few examples. The word order classification of a language is based on the normal or default use of word order in a declarative sentence and not based on some specific cases. Even though these cases might be grammatically correct, they just show that there might be some degrees of freedom in the language, but they don't impact the classification. Now, let's talk about languages that actually don't have a natural word order, because, well, they exist. For these languages, it doesn't matter the order of words in a sentence, it will always be understood the way it's intended. From this statement, we can draw 2 main questions. How is this possible, and why is this not a category to classify languages? Well, it technically can be a category. I mentioned that we can organize every language under 6 categories. Well, the truth is it could be 7 if we include 3 word order languages. The reason it's not always done is because in a 3 word order language, you still find the other word orders. There is often a default order that appears, but not always, which usually leads to the classification of a 3 word order language under a specific category, even though it is admitted that it's indeed a 3 word order language. And because there is often a default associated with the language, they can end up being categorized under a specific label, like SOV, SVO, OSV, etc. But yes, this could be its own category. In total, these languages represent 14 to 19% of the world's languages, depending on the sources. The thing is, the notion of 3 word order is tricky, because there are other factors that come into play, and it's often discussed if a language actually falls under this category or not. For example, Russian is sometimes described as a 3 word order language, but it still has a default that is used to categorize it. Because of that, it appears as fitting both SVO and the 3 word order category. That's why you can see both categories being applied to it. Now, let's see how it's even possible to have a 3 word order. There are multiple ways this could be achieved, but often the main factor behind this is the use of affixes on words. An affix is a morpheme, a small unit of meaning, you can add to the word to change its meaning. As such, you can add an affix to the verb to mention who the subject is, or who the object is, or both. The verb then carries the information, making the position of the subject or the object in a sentence irrelevant. Of course, this example is oversimplified, as a lot of languages add an affix to the subject or the object, or both, to provide information. Let's look at Russian to see how this would work. As I mentioned before, the default in Russian is SVO. Ja jem, ja bloki. But all word orders would work as well. Ja jem, ja bloki, jem ja. Jem ja, je bloki. Ja, je bloki jem. Je bloki, ja jem. Jem, je bloki ja. They all can be understood. People might give you a look depending on the order you give and depending on the context, but all is technically correct and can be used. To eat is jest. The ending is changed to mark the subject of the sentence. In this case, the first person singular, I, and the present tense. Jest, jem. So, we have an indication on the verb that the first person singular is the subject. We can move words freely, and the meaning will still be the same. The information of the sentence is not carried by the order of words, but by these affixes. While there can be a bit of a debate about the classification of Russian, it's a good example of how the use of affixes can replace word order and show how words can sometimes move freely in a language. Finally, like I mentioned before, there can be debates about some languages about whether they have a true word order or not because of the default order that's used most often. But there are actual instances of languages that have no default word order. This includes, for example, Warlpiri and Diwari, both Australian languages. If you know more examples where it's accepted that there is no default word order, please let me know in the comments. In my introduction video, I kept things simple to give an overview of the topic, but you can see that there's a lot more going on to classify languages. It's good to have a general idea about a word order, but looking more into the topic and various examples, you can see that it can become much more complex. To end this video, it's also important to note that some languages don't really fall under these categories either, or, to be more precise, a different categorization might work better. Germanic languages, such as German or Dutch, are qualified as V2 languages, or verb second, focusing on the fact that the position of the verb has to be in second position. It's another good example for us to see that word order can be more complex. The notion of SVO can work, but does not fit the best for these languages. To end this video, keep in mind that you may often see different examples of word order that are different from the linguistic classification of a language. In this case, remember that being understood or grammatically correct are not the sole requirements to determine the order of a language. There is more to it, but often, the default order of a declarative sentence, what people use in almost all of their use cases, is what is used.